Noswaith pawb a croeso cynnes i'r webinar hyn. Good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to this Diverse by Nature webinar on LGBTQIA plus inclusion in the environment and conservation sector, which is being held during the UK LGBTQ plus History Month. So a very deliberate placing here this time of year. My name is John Clark, he, him, and I work for Cyfoeth Naturiol Cymru, Natural Resources Wales, as a Senior Specialist Advisor for Land and Nature. And that role is within our National Department for Strategy, Policy and Evidence. So I'm your chair for this evening's webinar, representing the Natur and Byth Species Recovery and Engagement Partnership. This is a coalition between 9 environmental charities and NRW, which is principally funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, with vital match funding also from Welsh Government, the Landfill Disposal Tax Community Scheme, the Arts Council for Wales, Esme Fairbairn and NRW. We welcome you to check out the partnership by visiting the website naturandbyth.cymru. After this event, where you can find out far more about the projects, the partners, and indeed the species that the partnership is working with. So this programme, the Natur and Byth programme, is working hard across Wales in partnership with hundreds of landowners and sea users to halt the extinction of some of Wales' rarest species. The programme is also investing in the skills and knowledge it takes to build and maintain a workforce of nature conservation professionals and volunteers. And a key driver to that ambition is to create a professional environment that is welcoming to all. This really was one of the key drivers that led us to design and run this Diverse by Nature webinar series. And I'll touch a bit on the other events in this series later on in this evening's event. So just to start off with some housekeeping, and some of you may not have used this platform before, so this is a specialist webinar and online event hosting platform. We're going to be hearing from 2 fantastic speakers, from Dr. Robin Haywood and then from Andrew White. The reason why we've got these wonderful speakers here tonight is to talk about their own lived personal and professional experience working within the natural heritage environment sector. We're going to have an opportunity after their presentation, a short Q&A after each speaker, and then actually we'll have a slightly longer Q&A at the end of the webinar. So we should have about 15 minutes on that group call. So Christy, if you can move on to the next slide, that would be great. So folks, that is the proceedings, so you can see what we've got there. So I'm going to give a bit more background in terms of how to participate, and then we'll be moving on to our first speaker, who's Robin, and then we'll go into Andrew, and as I say, then we'll have a group Q&A. There will be the chance to profile questions for a brief time after each of our speakers, and then we'll have that group session as well. At the end, I'll have some closing remarks, but also an opportunity for a poll. I'd really, really appreciate it if people could take the time just at the end of the call, whilst everybody's still on the event, to just submit your views and experience from the event. It really helps in terms of shaping and evaluating the experiences that people have as part of this event series. Christy, if you can move to the next slide, that'd be great. So how to participate? So how does it work? The platform enables you as participants to post comments in a chat box. But if you have any specific questions, we'd like you to pose those to the speakers within a Q&A box. So we've got a Q&A on the side of the screen. You can see it's a little speech bubble with a question mark. That enables you to actually input a question, and then other attendees can upvote that question, so they can give a thumbs up, and that will help our moderators who are behind the scenes build then a suite of questions that we can run through with the speakers. One thing in terms of housekeeping I really would encourage you to do is to possibly refrain from posting your questions during that active period when our speakers are presenting. They've not got very long to speak, and we don't want to have too much distraction. So maybe just to prevent comments then piling up during the talks, maybe just capture your thoughts on your own screen and then paste them in to the Q&A box after the speaker's finished, or you could even put them in there but not click submit until after each of our speakers has completed. That would be great. But really importantly, we ask that all attendees on this webinar are respectful and courteous in the comments, and also within the Q&A section on the webinar platform. We do need to say that this event is a party political neutral space. I myself work for a public body, and I'm sure many attendees in this event are aware that this spring there are devolved national elections in Wales and in Scotland, and also local elections across England. But to be human is to be political. And the issues discussed this evening will touch on subjects relating to social justice and human rights. And we don't ignore that such issues are political in their nature, but we ask that everyone here tonight contributes to this being a safe and inclusive space, please. Christy, if you can move on to the next slide, that would be great. So this is part of a webinar series. I was very involved in designing this webinar series with a fantastic team who are running it tonight, and a number of partners and colleagues across the whole partnership. And right at the very concept of this, we felt we wanted this program for it to be vital, that the partnership creates safe spaces for professionals, for volunteers, and for members of the public to express who they are. When we looked at surveys of employees within the environment and natural heritage sector that have been undertaken across the years, it's really shown that ours is actually one of the least diverse sectors to work with within the whole of the UK. And in order to tackle the nature emergency in Wales, which is what Natur Unbeth is striving to do and is achieving, we need colleagues and volunteers who can relate to the public across a range of communities and backgrounds to ensure that the importance of nature recovery reaches all audiences. And our Diverse by Nature webinar series is really designed to put a spotlight on people working in our sector from diverse backgrounds, which for us felt particularly resonant for a species recovery programme that is celebrating the rare and the diverse in Wales. Next slide, please, Christy. Safety. We knew right from the start of the programme that we wanted to create safe spaces for those professionals and volunteers and the public to express who they are. And we're really proud of not just this webinar series, but a host of events and activities, and even just the collaborative workspaces that we've created across the partners where professionals and volunteers can actually really profile queer visibility within the sector. I'm a gay man myself, so I do understand from a personal perspective that people from an LGBTQ+ background can face different experiences working in the environment sector. For example, navigating deeply rural spaces or finding fellow colleagues who understand our own journey. If you can click on the next slide, please, Christy. So this just platforms the fantastic 3 previous webinars that we've already had, as well as the upcoming webinar we've got on the 18th of March, which will be celebrating neurodiversity in the environment and conservation sector. So please do sign up for that as well. And you can go back to the Natur Unbeth website on the resources section, and you can view the recordings from the previous events as well. Now, I'm actually, if you can move on to the next slide, please, Christy. I really want to move us on to our first speaker of the evening. That's Dr. Robin Hayward. Robin is a science communicator and designer, specialises in the subjects of trees, woodlands, and queerness in nature. Robin is also, this month, the creator of the official 2026 UK LGBTQ+ History Month badge, and is based in the north of England. So Crystal Mauer, a really large warm welcome to Robin. Thank you so much for taking part today, and I'm going to hand over the control of the slides and presentations to Robin. So diolch yn fawr.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me. I'm going to try to, as smoothly as possible, switch over to my slides, and hopefully that will all start working very smoothly, and you'll be able to see roughly what I'm going to be talking about today, which is this idea of the Pride Guidelines, which is a very fun acronym, but I will tell you what it stands for in about 10 minutes time. But basically my role has expanded a bit from just studying trees myself, and I've been starting to think a little bit more and working with other academics through the University of Leeds to decide on ways that we can better support LGBTQ+ field workers. And field workers are counting as anyone who is working outside of their home institution for whatever reason, whether that is going and doing some work in town near the shops, just a little bit down the road, or as I've tended to do, going to the far side of the planet and doing things far, far away from local support networks and things. So what I'm going to start with is a little bit of a view of my own career, which, as I say, has been quite far-flung. it won't necessarily seem immediately relevant to everything that you might think about for experiences in the UK today, but there are a lot of things that can be brought across. So I'm using this really as a case study that I can speak on with authority and not over-representing people who might not want me to talk about their details and such specifics to the same extent that I'm happy to do for myself. So very egotistically, I'm sure, big version of my name on screen. I'm Robin Hayward, pronouns they, them. As someone with a background in academia, I am technically Dr. Robin Hayward, although not the medical kind, the kind who studies trees a lot. And I am Canopy Robin basically everywhere that you can possibly find me. I have a few flags down at the bottom of the screen which represent my various identities, although these change from time to time. And I think it's a nice lens to look at how people might interact with the world of fieldwork and with nature by kind of just going through my career so far, if that's all right. So this is where I've been working, as I'm sure most of us have, for planet Earth. But there's trees over so much of it. It's given me a really big choice of places where I've been able to work. And originally, I was very intrigued by the idea of working in the tropics. So, early on in my career, when I was just an undergraduate student, I went out and I found the ability to go and start working in Indonesia, far side of the planet, studying trees. By the end of my undergrad, I'd been out there again to complete my own research. And that was climbing trees, going up sort of 50, 60 meters into the canopy of those trees and measuring the plants that were growing up at the top of them. So really incredible research. But from my personal circumstances at the same time, I was also developing an identity and wanting to understand it better. So where that comes into this is, at the time, I was thinking my identity is approximately a bisexual man. And at the time, that was fine. I think I recognized that I needed to kind of put that to one side while I was away in the field and really just focus on the science. And that's quite a pervasive narrative. But at the time, it wasn't a core part of my identity. It wasn't something I was really actively questioning and looking into. So I set it to the side and I went out and I did my work. And that absolutely will not be true of everyone. And it wouldn't be true of me now, but it is one of the many experiences that you can have as an LGBTQ plus person going into the field to do some kind of a work. So fast forwarding a few years to the time between my first degree and my PhD, when I spent 2 months living in a treehouse over in Dominica in the Caribbean. I was studying the different shapes between the trees, the ways that would impact different types of animals that would fly through and use the structure of that space. And this was a really cool experience, right? But it does mean I was away living in a treehouse, again, on a far-flung bit of the planet for about 2 months. And that meant I was far away from my local support networks, from people I knew. And by this point, while I still was thinking that I was a bisexual man, maybe with a little bit more of a question mark around the man, I was kind of less comfortable with putting that away. I was really actively exploring who I might be and what my identity might mean for my future. So the idea of no longer talking about that while I was away and isolated from these support networks was something that was a little bit more difficult for me to get around. This is actually the first field site where I came out to co-workers. I don't think I'd ever had to come out in that situation before. It's a bit weird with universities because you don't really know who is a co-worker and who is just a friend, and there's that strange place because no one's really being employed. But this was the first time that I was really actively a member of staff. I came out to my colleagues and I didn't realize that it was weighing on me at all, really, until a couple of days after that, when a senior colleague mentioned how much happier and more relaxed I looked. And I think, therefore, there's that retrospect where you go, oh yeah, I was really carrying a weight. And sometimes there is this trend that for queer people working in nature, we put it aside and we think we'll just focus on the job. And it's not until we actually bring it into our lives and embrace our identity in the world that we work in, that we realize what it was that we were actually keeping hold of. So that was my first example of coming out in the field, in a rainforest. And then literally like a week later, I think, I jumped to the other side of the planet to start preparing for my PhD. This was working in oil palm plantations out in Malaysia. And it was a really incredible experience. But again, my queer identity was brought with me and I had to kind of put it away again. So whereas I had just been able to come out on a field site in one country, this country was the first time that another academic took me aside and said, hey, I'm queer and I'm out when I'm in the UK, but here it's not something that I'm sharing with people. And so I took that on board for the first time, and I got to see what it's like for people to feel uncomfortable being themselves in that dramatic a way, and to just kind of hide elements of who they are back at home. So I found that to be a really enlightening experience, and I learned a huge amount from it. It was really cool research, but it was that kind of point where I was starting to understand who I was and where my position might fall in the sector I was working in. So again, fast forward by, I think, probably another year to the first bit of field work that I did during my PhD. And I'm back out in Malaysia. I am studying trees, specifically the way that trees have grown back since a lot of logging happened about 30 years ago in Malaysia. So where forests were cut down, how have they recovered? Fascinating subject. But the thing that I want to talk about in this talk is really what it was like to spend 6 months living there. Because 6 months is a long time to be away, to be 7 hours ahead of our current time zone, and to not necessarily have a shared first language with anyone in your team that you're working with. So yes, I speak enough Malay to chat about the weather and to chat about my science, and they speak enough English to kind of do likewise, and there's this reciprocal chatter and small talk. But the ability to actually get into deeper conversations and talk about identity and things that I was very much working through and discovering for myself. At this point, I think I was identifying mostly as bisexual and non-binary by this point. And I was really thinking about this a lot. So not being able to have those conversations was quite a weight. And all of this kind of led through so that through this process of self-discovery and referencing how I feel to be in nature and these beautiful spaces that are so complex and diverse, by the end of my PhD, I discovered that I was trans, which the best thing I've ever discovered, honestly. It's great. But it did come with certain things that I had to think about, like where I might want to continue working, how comfortable I was with international travel and with airports, and all sorts of things that might affect my life going forwards. And so when I graduated my PhD, I decided that actually, for that and various other reasons to do with tropical research and my feelings about it, I decided that I would move to a different country where trans things were all going to be much easier. And that's obviously been going great. There is some context to all of these places, which means it is not so straightforward. And I just want to go through that quite quickly to share with you what I was going through as I was experiencing these things and the context behind that. So we'll start going left to right rather than chronological again. Dominica, when I was there, homosexuality wasn't yet legal. It is now, I'm very happy to say, but still no recognition of same-sex unions and no laws against discrimination, at least at the point where I updated these slides last. So do not quote me on that. But that is the situation as it was and as I was perceiving it. So that's the background that I was existing in. And as I say, I wasn't as tuned into things as I maybe am now, but that was still a pervasive background context to what I was going through. Over in Malaysia, at the time I was out there, it was the second worst country in the world for trans rights, and then up to 20 years in prison with caning and fines for gay sex. So again, there are a lot of reasons why my own personal privilege of British passport, white skin, various other factors would probably mean that those things would not have been what happened to me. However, there was a real feeling for me personally that something could happen. That background of the legal context, that background of cultural context, just little things that meant I was a little bit more stressed and a little bit less comfortable the entire time. And even if all that happened was that I no longer felt welcome in a space and had to maybe return to the UK without completing all of my work, that would still have been a mortifying experience that I didn't want to happen. So these things really were just sitting there and weighing. And I should say that most of the people are absolutely lovely and accepting. And a lot of the time it is as much about the field workers' perceived reaction to threats as about the real ones that exist in the day-to-day life. But it doesn't make them any less valid. So Moving on to Indonesia, homosexuality is legal, but no same-sex marriage or protection from discrimination. Legal gender can be changed with conditions. So maybe better than the others, still some things we're working on. And then jumping forward to the UK, where I'm working now in the north of England, creating Woodlands. Current implementation of anti-trans healthcare legislation and increasing anti-trans rhetoric in the media. And I don't think this is necessarily a forum to go into all the details of that, but it is a recognized thing now internationally, the UK's anti-trans rhetoric, along with a lot of other places in Europe and in America, is increasing, and it is getting harder and potentially more dangerous to work in public and outdoor spaces. And even if those threats don't materialize physically, just the perception of them by the field workers can be a real issue. So that's kind of setting the stage to where our latest work comes in, which is the Pride Fieldwork Guidelines. And I promised you we would get to hear about what this acronym beautifully means. So we are in pointers for research that is inclusive, diverse, and equitable for LGBTQ+ field workers. And of course, we have tortured this acronym to manage to get these words to spell the word pride. But it roughly sums up what it is that we were trying to do. We have been working to create guidelines that support people to do work in nature and to do field work, particularly from an academic background, but a lot of these things do transfer to anyone working outside in nature who might have a team or a home institution supporting them to do that work. So hopefully you'll be able to find things that fit your own individual context, or at least recognize some of the humanity from what is shared in experiences. So yeah, this was based at the University of Leeds. There is a wonderful URL here that will keep showing up in these slides that takes you to all of these things in more detail. And as I've said, University of Leeds, but with a lot of help from other organizations. So from Motus TV and Nifty Fox Creative. Motus TV, as you might imagine from the TV bit of it, helped us to create 3 different videos that summarize the findings of our work. And Nifty Fox were really good. They created a lot of 2-dimensional resources for us to illustrate things. And we're actually in our focus groups while we were talking to people, creating live illustrations of what people were saying. So that was really, really helpful. And I mentioned that we have, I mentioned we have focus groups. Before we get to them, this is the team that kind of logistically made it all happen. So the team at the University of Leeds, led by Professor Martin Zabraki, and then a whole bunch of the rest of us. And I was mostly in on the logistics for this project. But it goes beyond that. We obviously talked about Motus and Nifty Fox. The 3 focus groups that we ran to initially create these resources, which have since been refined with additional focus groups at conferences, were really valuable. And we made sure that we wanted to pay for those participants to be involved as well. So each participant was paid for their time, and that time was not conditional. They could just show up and then leave. Nobody did, but there was definitely a statement that just by turning up, it's absolutely fine. You've got that money, you could walk away and we would delete the data and no problem. So nobody was coerced to say anything. Everyone was valued for their time. And even at the point where we talk about the videos that were created, those were all people from the LGBTQ+ community that we were able to pay for their time and support through that. So really exciting. We asked a whole bunch of different questions in these focus groups, and we found a lot of the same topics kept coming up. So this is just an example of one real-time illustration that happened during these groups. So you can kind of see similar things. I won't dwell on these too long because we don't have a huge amount of time for this presentation, but similar kind of topics coming up each time. We talked about what resources might be necessary. Resources we had already made. We wanted to look at some feedback for how we might talk about codes of conduct and for risk assessments of people going out to work in nature. And then beyond that, we asked how would people actually like to hear about the results of our study? How would people like these guidelines to be presented? So we created leaflets and we created videos, all informed by the people we were talking to. And that was both LGBTQ+ people themselves and allies. And what we came up with at the end of it was this, the Pride Fieldwork Guidelines, which are a series of leaflets and one-pagers, but then crucially 3 videos that add up to about 20 minutes all between them. And if you have time after this, I really recommend going and watching them. They are a much higher production value than me speaking to you right now. As best as I've tried, these kind of scripted and really dense bits of information with visuals animated in are going to be really good ways of showing you the kinds of things we want people to be considering a little bit more. So as I say, I don't really have time to go through absolutely everything right now, but what I will do is I'll focus in on our main 2-page spread graphic, which is a guide to more inclusive fieldwork. And it kind of just follows the narrative of how someone might go about starting a project out in nature and the environment. So for us in academia, this starts quite early on with a lot of conversations, a lot of applying for funding, and you might recognize that in other sectors too, because I think it's a pretty common format. There might be a few differences in terms, but basically we start with setting things up. And it's really important to be open during that initial stage of planning, to assume that you have some LGBTQ+ people in your group, because statistically, you probably do, even if they're not out, even if they're literally not even out to themselves yet, they're just questioning things. It shouldn't be on the responsibility of an LGBTQ+ person to raise that these things need considering. They should just be part of your process. Because we did find consistently that people found at the very beginning of projects is where LGBTQ+ people were dropping out. So I'm going to include a few quotes from our focus groups here. This one says, sometimes people just won't do fieldwork in a place at all because they don't feel that they'll be safe there. And this is a sentiment that came up a lot. People will look just at the headline statement of a piece of work that needs doing and make a snap decision about whether they're going to feel safe. So if you can address that really early, that's going to be really, really helpful. Another quote, we already have this problem where students will take themselves out of the positions where they might undertake field training. So students aren't even learning how to do the field skills in the first place because they are seeing something that feels like it might not be safe or inclusive for them to be a part of. And they'll kind of step back and say, you know what, I'm gonna not be part of this. So talking about it really early on and not necessarily thinking about it and then going, oh, well, it's impossible to do, but actually doing a risk assessment, talking about the idea that, yes, this might not be safe, but how can we make it as safe as possible to include people rather than shutting it down entirely? So really important to have those conversations early on and to include details in that. So not just saying things as broad strokes, but thinking about things so that when things happen, you can account for them. So thinking in advance about travel restrictions. If you're doing something in an area that might be unsafe, if there's a lot of antisocial behavior, for example, that's going to affect some people differently than others. And you should be aware of the areas that you're working in. If you're crossing international boundaries, for sure, you want to make sure that people are safe and that there aren't any LGBTQ+ specific restrictions to travel in a place, but also thinking about the intersectionality of it all. So I benefit hugely from various intersectional factors of my own identity. So the fact I have a British passport and the fact that my skin is white means that I'm not going to be treated the same way as an LGBTQ+ person of color trying to pass through certain international boundaries. So it's really important to recognize that and to consider things carefully as just what might happen, where might people feel excluded and therefore kind of in their own internal risk assessment exclude themselves. So focusing on those details, the really common detail that everyone will always talk about is toilets and bathrooms and really any single sex spaces. And that comes up time and time again because it is genuinely a really big issue. The important thing is to give people as much autonomy as possible to self-select where they're able to go. But even just the anxiety around intruding in spaces or feeling unwelcome can immediately be a point where people count themselves back out of things. We've got another quote here. The fear over their toilet needs is one of the big barriers. This is referring to students. I think we've got a siloing effect on who ends up going to do field-based research that starts quite early on in the education system. So again, we did a lot of these focus groups based in the university, and it was really noticeable that people who feel that they aren't able to access a single-sex binary space are not going to attend. So non-binary people or trans people, however they feel excluded, they are just going to self-select and take themselves out of fieldwork rather than risking that conflict or that lack of safety. So that's all before you even start going on the fieldwork. There's also a good example of getting safe people and advocates in the field that you can talk to and expectations of how you're going to talk to them. But once you're actually in the field, reality is hard. No plans survive first contact with reality. So during the field, it's important to be flexible, but having done all this planning means that you can be more flexible. And importantly, that anyone who is LGBTQ+ in your team knows that any concerns they have are going to be treated seriously. So within that, it is possible to have both informal and formal systems of reporting. And that's what we're really suggesting. that yes, you might have a formal thing which says, oh no, something has happened. Here is a serious complaint about some HR issue, or like someone's done something, or someone is scared, someone is actively unsafe. And that's very formal, but informal of just having a chat with people and creating a workplace culture that allows chats is going to be hugely beneficial to LGBTQ+ people. Bearing in mind that power dynamics do change within and outside of the field. So we found that a lot of the time people were being asked to do work that wouldn't be expected of them back at their home institution. So for example, junior colleagues suddenly ended up with a lot more care and responsibility to make sure that people from an LGBTQ+ background were being taken care of. They were the ones being approached, but also relative power levels between people will change based on cultural contexts and the physical environment you're in. We also decided, or we also found, that came up a lot, that people weren't comfortable with the same level of being out in the field as they might be back at home. Depending on the cultural context you're sitting in, you might be more or less comfortable with referencing in a passing way a same-sex partner or something different about your gender. A lot of people decide for their own reasons that they don't want to be out during the field. And the goal here is not to say that everyone should be out at all times. There are lots of different contexts. We all treat our lives in different ways and behave in different ways. People should be able to be out at all times, but don't assume that your colleagues are always going to be out to the same extent, was a really big message coming through these things. And that's about it for this quick whistle-stop tour of the guidelines to consider. As I say, the videos have a lot more information in them. But even after fieldwork, that's not where fieldwork really ends. When you get home, things carry on. And for a lot of people, especially at universities, home, as in back to their local institution, doesn't necessarily actually mean home to their friends and family who might be in an entirely different country again. So that was something to really consider. And here is just one quote that exemplifies this. It says, "I think I just repressed a little bit when I was doing fieldwork. And when I got back, I was like, oh, what's going on?" Because that happens a lot. The idea that you really do try and set things aside and just get the work done. And then the moment you relax, all of the emotions and all of that internalized and repressed expression just hits you all at once. And a lot of the time, people who are supervising or people who are meant to be supporting don't know to check in at that point. So that was something that came up a lot. This person went on to say, "I finished all of my field work, but I still can't be out now. I'm always conscious, like, oh, I need to remove my pronouns from my email. Or if I wanted to do a collaboration with a friend about the dynamics of fieldwork experiences, I couldn't." So this could very easily have been a quote from me. It wasn't, but I felt the same way. When I was working in places where I knew pronouns would not be culturally acceptable with the people I was working with, I didn't include them in my email signature. And I meant that people, even at my home institution at the university I was working at, didn't know my correct pronouns because I was removing them from all emails, just out of an abundance of precaution. So really, to end this properly, there's this need for ongoing support. Things do just keep going. And if you're trying to be an ally to anyone working in this sector, the important thing is really to just keep checking in, to start early on before the fieldwork itself, to check in during the fieldwork, and then afterwards, because sometimes we don't really process the things that we go through until days, weeks, months, maybe a year after the fact. So just keep checking in, especially if there's an expectation to go out and do work again. And that's pretty much it. These are much more full and explored guidelines on our website. So that is inclusivefieldwork.leeds.ac.uk. And there's a fully referenceable, secure version of that online as well. So I think that is about my time, and I'm very happy to take a few questions. I will stop sharing my slides again, but thank you all so much for listening.
Oh, diolch yn fawr. Thank you so much, Robin. That was fascinating. So just, if only such a thing had existed when I was doing field work in my goodness, late teens in Trinidad and Tobago and the Highlands and all these places that were quite challenging. But there we go. Thank you so much. It's great to see such resources available, and we can also share those links as well. Now, folks, I said earlier, if we can use the Q&A section in the left-hand side. So if you click on that box, it's the speech icon with the question mark, and that's where you can upload any questions, please, from the audience. So I'm going to sort of pause to let people put in some questions. I think there might be some stuff in the chat as well. But I'm just going to wait for some questions to come through in the Q&A section. I'm just going to pick up on one thing while we wait for other questions to come up, if that's all right, Robin.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned internal risk assessments. I think I'm fascinated by that concept, and perhaps as LGBTQ plus people, perhaps we're not even aware that we're undertaking those. But actually, how did people verbalize that when you undertook the kind of research building this resource?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming from an academic background, we are constantly risk assessing everything we do in very formalized paperwork kind of ways as well. So anything that we do, we're saying, okay, here's what I want to do, here are the risks associated with it, and maybe here's how we can mitigate some of those risks. And after all of that, is it worth doing? Is it something that we feel we can endanger ourselves, the public, any kind of co-workers with? And so that's a kind of formal risk assessment procedure. But I think we also always do this in our mind as well, like oh, I want to jump off a cliff. Is there some water at the bottom of it? And you just kind of do all this in the background in your head very quickly, and you don't sign a piece of paperwork, but you're doing something to tell you if a situation is safe and if the pros outweigh the cons. And so I think as queer people, we often do this with a less tangible form of danger. So it's not like there is a tiger that's about to attack you. It is just a case of, okay, my mental health is going to be suffering for this amount of time if I can't be out, if I can't be around my social networks, if I feel like I'm at genuine risk. And so people often do these risk assessments very quickly in their heads and assume the worst without necessarily finding resources for themselves, because it is scary. And at its very worst, the danger can be really large. So people often count themselves out very, very quickly from these things.
I just saw a comment there in the chat, Raoul Bramble, saying, yeah, I didn't realize how much internalized repression I'd taken on early in my career, which is exactly what I was thinking when I was hearing. So, right, we've got some questions, so we're going to do a few questions if that's okay, but I don't want to take up Andrew's time as well. So I'm going to pick some if that's okay. So we've got one here from Audrey Roy. Robin, did you feel any lasting impacts on a personal level of being unable to be your authentic self in the early stages of your career? That's from Audrey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are various reasons why I wasn't able to be my authentic self. And a big part of that was not understanding who my authentic self was yet. So I do think having more resources available to me, as they are now available through social media and a lot more of the internet accessibility, would have let me discover who I was a lot earlier. From the example of fieldwork, though, I think the lasting impact has really been around the way that I've created interpersonal connections. So between, I guess, the ages of like 20 and 27-ish, I spent most of my summers away doing exciting outdoor things and being away from home, but often in different time zones than my peers, the people I was trying to form bonds with and discuss things with, and who might have been really able to help me uncover aspects of my identity and support me through them. And kind of this broken up way of how we interact with people who can understand us and support us best is one of the risks of fieldwork that I think has been the most lasting. So I have a few very strong friendships that survived that, but I think there are also a lot of friendships and relationships along the way that didn't survive me going away for a few months and could have helped me to explore more aspects of my personal identity. So yeah, it's a really good question. And I think a lot of the time those long-lasting impacts aren't necessarily where you would professionally expect them to appear.
Thank you. And thank you, Audrey, for your question. Right, I'm going to ask one more question, if that's okay. We've got an amazing presentation. Thank you. What do you think are the greatest challenges employers should look out for their teams for when supervising fieldwork in the UK? So in the UK specifically.
This is a really good question. So challenges employers should look out for. Feeling seen and anticipated. As an employer, it makes a huge difference if people can see that you are being proactive about sorting things out and making it aware that you have people who you can talk to and who will advocate on your behalf. So I can see another question in the chat that says about difficulties of self-advocation. And I think that is something that if you can find your employer and get your employer to do that for you, that is one of the biggest things that can be done. I will also, as always, circle us back to the availability of single-sex spaces. So making sure that toilets are available. We have a woodland that we planted a few years ago, but we still don't actually have any toilets on. So we're very much using the public toilets a bit down the road, and we're trying to sort that from an accessibility perspective for disability as well. But if you only have toilets that are labelled male, female, then there is a huge amount of anxiety around accessing those. So this still remains one of those things, and even just highlighting what toilet provision there is for a site, especially if you don't own it yourselves, is something that employers can do. And if you can do it with a direct example of, and here is an accessible toilet, which is the option for non-binary or gender non-conforming individuals, just that kind of thing, thinking ahead in advance and being proactive in dealing with worries that might not be addressed for queer people until they actually arrive on the site.
Thank you, Robin. No, that was really comprehensive and really important to get the context of how it feels now. I love you saying, don't rely on just, the young people will sort of work out what the LGBTQ co-workers require. It's the responsibility of employers to be aware of those spaces and what colleagues require. Valrian, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So Robin, we'll come back to questions as well in the group session. But now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Andrew White. Andrew is Director of the National Lottery Heritage Fund in Wales, which is the principal funder for the Natty and Bith programme. Andrew joined Heritage Fund in 2020, and previous to this, he was Director of Stonewall Cymru. And prior to that, he was also the head of health and voluntary sector at the Welsh Language Board. Croeso mawr, big welcome, please, to Andrew. Thanks so much for contributing today, and over to you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, John, a noswaith dda i chi gyd. Diolch hefyd am y gwahoddiad i ymuno ni heno. A mis hanes hapus I bawb. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, John, for the kind introduction and for the invitation to join you as part of the Natty and Bith team this evening, and for bringing us all together. And of course, happy LGBTQ+ History Month to everyone. My name, as you've heard, is Andrew, he, him. I'm the Director of the National Lottery Heritage Fund in Wales, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation this evening, both professionally and personally. Today sits right at the heart of what good leadership should do, which is bringing people together to make it easier for people to be themselves, and of course to bring their best to the work that matters. So even though my connection to Natty and Bith is through my work, I'm not speaking primarily tonight on behalf of any organisation. I'm speaking simply as me, as Andrew, someone who's grown up navigating difference, someone who cares about nature, and of course the people who look after it, and as someone who believes deeply in inclusion. I'm going to give you a bit of personal background, lived experience and reflection, and a bit of my views on inclusion and diversity in the sector. And I always struggle with the word sector because, as many of you in the room will know, the natural heritage, nature sector, conservation sector is quite varied and can actually be several sectors interlocking. So please bear with me using that rather lazy shorthand. So to start with, nature played a quiet, steady role in my life from an early stage. I was lucky enough, following a family breakup, that my mum could only afford to live in a caravan. It absolutely broke her heart to tell us as three young kids that we wouldn't have a house to live in anymore. But we were all thrilled. We were really excited because that caravan was located in the beautiful village of Ogmore by Sea, with rugged and sometimes harsh landscapes. Nearby Merthyr Mawr, towering sand dunes, which were a great warren, literally a warren for us to play in. And of course, not forgetting the constant song of the sea that was my soundtrack for my early years. And that's where I fell in love with nature. It's where I grew up and where I came to at least begin to start to know myself. I should qualify that one. Outdoors, I don't feel judged. I wasn't performing anything. I didn't have any reason to defend who I was there. It was, you know, looking back, I realized that nature was probably the first place where I felt I could simply be, you know, not hiding, not explaining, not negotiating, just being. And that early experience colours the way I think about inclusion in the natural heritage sector now, because I know how powerful a landscape can be, how powerful the sound of nature can be, the smells, the sights. And I also know how easily that sense of welcome can disappear if the people around you don't feel welcoming. So this evening we're talking about inclusion in the natural heritage sector through an LGBTQ+ lens, and much of this is learning that can be applied to differences. And for me, it's about more than policy. It's about culture. It's about everyday behaviours. It's about the stories we tell about who belongs in our landscapes, our organisations, and our decision making. So I'll start with some personal context and why visibility matters to me. I grew up gay in a working class family in South Wales. I had many role models. You know, they affirmed me, they anchored me in my community, they validated who I was, where my roots lie. But I can't recall a single role model who was out as LGBTQ+, or at least if they were, no one mentioned it. We know how powerful role models are. You know, young people tell us they feel more confident when they can look up to see someone like them. And it's not just young people, your colleagues, your friends in workplaces, you know, large workplaces, small workplaces, they describe how their own sense of possibility expands when they can see people like them succeeding or just existing in the workspace. You know, in Wales, we are famous for a touch of self-effacing modesty. It can make the label role model feel a bit uncomfortable, but the truth is, all of you in the room tonight are role models to someone, I can guarantee you. For many LGBTQ+ people, role models aren't celebrities on pedestals. They're the everyday people around us, a teammate, a manager, a ranger, a volunteer, the person who's quietly, consistently themselves. And that's why leadership, visibility in leadership matters, not because leaders should be the loudest voices, but because being visible can lower the temperature in the room. It helps replace uncertainty with trust. It signals that difference isn't just tolerated, it's valued. And it's also important to note that leadership doesn't require hierarchy or job titles. We are all leaders in different contexts. Leadership takes many forms, formal, informal, all of them as valid. So, you know, on feeling different and then what I feel that's taught me about leadership, well, across my life, I've known what it is to feel different or even excluded because of my sexual orientation, my class background, my struggles with my mental health. Those experiences have shaped my approach to leadership much more than any qualification or training, with apologies to anyone listening who might have facilitated any of my qualifications or training. Those experiences, they've taught me to value the difference in others, to be open about my own vulnerabilities, which I think is a strength, and to work hard at creating conditions where people can shine in who they are and in what they do. If I had to choose one word that sums up leadership for me, it would be authenticity. Not as a brand, but as a practice, showing up truthfully, listening carefully, and allowing people to bring their lived experience to the room. When leaders do that, we turn what might feel like risk, you know, do I really say this out loud, into permission. Yes, it's safe to be who you are here. When leaders do that, it changes a team, it gives permission, it creates a culture where people can feel safe to bring more of themselves to work, and nature in this context benefits from that. Because if you want people to work bravely for nature, they need to be able to work honestly as themselves. So I mentioned mental health, and I'm going to touch briefly on that from a personal perspective. You know, I've spoken before publicly about my experiences with depression over the years. Wasn't easy to share the first time. I know that other people sharing has helped me, so I do try to share where I can. You know, when I first started sharing, it felt like I was coming out in a different way, in a different context all over again. But, you know, naming that made an enormous difference to me. It turned something that felt heavy, that weighed me down, it isolated me, into something that I could understand and work with. And what helped most were the people around me, the colleagues, the friends, the managers, the people who showed compassion without making it awkward, the people who checked in without a fuss, the people who normalized the idea that mental health is part of being a human being. You know, I won't romanticize depression, but I can acknowledge, at least in my context, that living with it and managing it over the years has shaped me in ways I value. It's taught me to be calm in a crisis, to smile even in the face of difficult situations, and to remember that every person we encounter at work and in our lives has many layers we can't see. In that sense, mental health didn't weaken my leadership skills or experience, it deepened it. And nature was also, a key part of my recovery. It's a constant factor in my mental health maintenance. The mental health benefits, as we all know, of nature are, of course, well documented. And in the context of the sector, being aware of the mental health needs of the nature sector workforce is paramount. Robin's already touched on some really serious impacts on people's well-being and mental health, because workplaces in this sector are often very different from your typical office settings. Isolated sites, variable hours, public-facing roles, emotional encounters with communities, physically demanding work, and sometimes just the pressure of caring for fragile places and a real threat. So I want to move on then to the heritage sector today and why change is necessary. You know, in our natural and cultural heritage spaces, LGBTQ+ people are present, often enthusiastically so, but not always visible or fully comfortable being themselves. The stories we tell in landscapes and learning materials can default unintentionally to heteronormativity. So the result then is a subtle friction. People who love nature and heritage may still wonder if they fit in the sector's traditional culture. The good news is things are improving. I've definitely seen that in my lifetime. More organizations are asking better questions. More leaders are recognizing that diversity isn't an add-on, an additional extra, but it's the engine of better engagement, better science, better decisions. So still, as many of you, I need to acknowledge, will be all too aware, there are still very real threats and challenges to our communities, to our siblings, particularly in the trans community today. And that's why conversations like this matter. They turn good intentions into shared expectations. So why does LGBTQ+ inclusion matter in nature conservation, in natural heritage? Well, first, because nature is for everyone. It is of everyone, but not everyone feels equally welcome in natural spaces or in natural heritage careers. You know, a landscape can be beautiful and still feel socially inhospitable if people don't see themselves reflected in who manages it or in the stories told about it. Secondly, because diversity fuels creativity. Conservation, natural heritage is complex, multidisciplinary work. We need teams that think differently, challenge assumptions, and bring varied life experience to problem solving. And LGBTQ+ inclusion doesn't compete with ecological outcomes. It strengthens them by unlocking better engagement with the communities whose support and participation work with nature depends on. And third, because welcoming teams are higher performing teams. When colleagues feel safe, comfortable, they collaborate more, they innovate more, they recover more quickly when things go wrong, and things will go wrong. Partnerships are easier, trust is stronger, inclusion isn't a nice to have, it's an infrastructure issue to work in natural heritage, and I believe in all organizations, or should be. one of the great myths about natural heritage is that it's all about the nature. Now, I would be remiss of me to dismiss the nature in this particular room, but it's not all about the nature. It's about people. People restore habitats. People run volunteer days. People interpret landscapes and tell stories and build relationships with communities. And people decide how inclusive or exclusive an outdoor space feels. And people bring their whole lives with them, their identities, their hopes, their frailties, their humor, their histories. LGBTQ plus people are part of every aspect of natural heritage. We're volunteers, rangers, surveyors, project managers, ecologists, storytellers, community connectors. But we haven't always been visible. And when you're not visible, organizations often assume you're not there. So visibility matters, not because anyone needs a spotlight, but because it tells others you're not alone. You belong in this story too. There's a space for you here to thrive. So I'm going to conclude with just a few practical actions, some things that we can all do regardless of our job title or our level of influence. And the first is make belonging visible. Small signals matter, pronouns, welcome statements, inclusive language, in outdoor settings, normalizing, invitations to share experiences from minoritized communities, ensuring events feel culturally welcoming as well, and not assuming what you think will be culturally welcoming, but involve people from the LGBTQ community to tell you what would be culturally welcoming there. Secondly, strengthen the social side of working in the nature sector. So this isn't, I used to work in a role where we'd encourage people to have staff networks, and it would be, well, once you taught them to spell lesbian, they'd be talking, they say, well, we've got 3 people in the network now, and they all meet down the pub. So anyone who doesn't drink is excluded. So yes, strengthen the social side, but it doesn't have to revolve around culturally unwelcoming spaces. Think about your volunteer days, site meetings, team socials. Does everyone feel comfortable? Does everyone feel seen? A quick check-in can make a big difference, actually. Thirdly, expand your partnerships. Reach out to LGBTQ plus walking groups, youth groups, wellbeing organizations. Invite them to help shape your projects, not just attend events. Because inviting them to be part of that actually expands everything that I said earlier about the knowledge and lived experience of a team. Fourthly, then, support people's whole selves. So do be attentive to mental health. Listen when someone seems low or off or quieter than normal. Don't pry. Don't be a pain in the proverbial for someone who you think might be suffering, but do make sure they know you're there. Offer flexibility where possible. Kindness is one of the most powerful forms of leadership, and it really doesn't matter if Joe from accounts takes another couple of hours off today because he's, finding it tough after a relationship breakdown. You can make that time up. Fifthly, tell wider stories. Use the interpretation, events, digital content to tell stories. I know there's a great story, and forgive me if I get the name wrong, but there's a rainbow beetle in Eryri in North Wales, and it's part of the Natur am Byth project, and it's been used to connect with the LGBTQ plus stories. Actually, you're telling the story there of a particular species that's at risk. Beautiful little thing. But you're actually using it as a hook for LGBTQ plus stories. And finally, sixth, model behavior you want to see. So authenticity from leadership at any level gives people the confidence to be their authentic self. So let me close with some thoughts. And firstly, nature never asked me to be anything other than myself. And that's the kind of workplace culture I believe we all deserve. Nature has always held diversity at its core. It's what makes ecosystems resilient. It's what allows landscapes to adapt, to survive, to flourish. And the same is true for the people who care for nature. I don't speak today as an expert on LGBTQ plus issues or as a representative of any particular campaign or organization. I simply speak as someone who loves nature, who grew up shaped by my local landscapes, and who knows from personal experience how powerful belonging can be. So when someone feels seen, heard, and welcomed and valued, they bring more of themselves to work, which benefits us all. They become braver, more committed, more imaginative, and nature needs that. Nature needs all of us. So, Igloi, diolch yn fawr iawn am wrando. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Oh, diolch yn fawr, Andrew. That was fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing, a deeply personal sort of journey of how nature shaped you and how we can shape it. And thank you for referencing the people. And we very strongly designed Natur and Byth to not just be brackets a species recovery partnership, but actually a species recovery and engagement program. And so that engaging with people, both colleagues and the public, has been so core to the cause. I'm going to allow people, please, to put your questions to Andrew in the question box on the left-hand side. So I'm going to wait for that to hopefully fill up with a few, so we can just direct questions specifically to Andrew first. While we wait for some to come in, I'm going to ask a question, if that's okay. Mental health needs or mental health experiences of those working in nature conservation. It's something that really came up because we survey the workforce within Natur and Byth, but we've also had sharing sessions as part of groups when we come together in person. And this really was something that was apparent, that being at the coalface of species extinction is emotionally quite stretching. I'm just, you referenced it entirely as yourself within your presentation as well. Is that something you see from other organizations or partnerships that the Heritage Fund funds, or is this something you've observed across the sector?
Well, I think it's something I've observed throughout my working life. And, my very first, it wasn't a job, it was a volunteering post, which is a job. I just wasn't paid for it. It was with the Glamorgan Heritage Coast when I signed up when I was 14. And, I saw then people struggling with their mental health, having to live in, provided accommodation in very isolated places, exposed to the weather, which, wasn't for everyone. It's not always, it's not always good for your mental health. So I think I have seen that throughout my working life from very, very early age. It is a thing.
Yeah.
And you will have seen more of it than I have more recently, I think.
Yeah, no, we were quite, it was quite moving to hear that experience of people working within Natur and Byth who are custodians of these species on the brink of extinction. And I think, sort of really hearing that and giving people the space to how it feels. I've even heard of some people doing sort of grief workshops actually within the sector, and it's really, really interesting stuff.
And I think it's important, to recommend to recognize that mental health is like physical health, and it's something everyone has, and it's something that fluctuates. So, check in with people without fuss. So that's really important. But be flexible wherever you can. Create a culture where saying I'm struggling a bit doesn't feel like a confession or complete meltdown. Compassionate leadership does go a long way.
It's back to that issue about safety. People need to feel safe within that space. Raoul has asked about your Darth Vader demo. What was it drawing attention to? Repression and perhaps.
That's my favourite holding slide from now on. I did for a lecture I gave just a couple of weeks ago, and it just shows how varied the job is. So Darth Vader was attending the launch of, this may come as news to some people, an exhibition on the Millennium Falcon in Pembroke Dock. Why? Because the Millennium Falcon real model was actually the last ship ever built in Pembroke Dock. It was a massive secret, everyone knew about it, but it was supposed to be a top secret project. So they constructed it in Pembroke Dock in the dockyards, and they then put it on the back of some lorries in bits down the M4 to the studios.
I did not know that.
And we funded a small exhibition on it. So you can go and visit a replica of the Millennium Falcon.
Hurrah.
There you go.
Brilliant. So I've got a question here from Joe Simpson. I grew up in Llanfair Major and Ogmore. It was such a big escape for me when I was figuring out I was trans as a teenager. I think as queer people, we are drawn to nature landscape for relief. Yes, absolutely. And Andrew, you touched on that in terms of people drawn to it, but it might not always feel like a safe space for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's great to have a near neighbour there growing up in the same landscape as I did. And, it's beautiful. It can be bleak, particularly in the winter months, which I strangely found quite enjoyable, getting that, that sharpness on your skin. It also, there's a physical distance with that wide open space for me that gives you that kind of safety from strangers, but also you can get close enough that you can say hello. I think, what was the question again?
It was more just sort of,
and it is that escape. I, with my little Sony Walkman on and a bit of John Rutter, could completely lose myself walking along the beach for miles sometimes and for hours. Yeah,
I think a lot of people will resonate with what you said. With when in nature you didn't need to hide or explain yourself. So actually, when there's not other people around, it's not a judgmental space. So we've got a question. Oh, this is from Lizzie. Well before. So hello, Lizzie. As a sector, a lot of our people engagement work does focus on group engagement. Do you think we should focus more on what can be gained by on your own with nature? So that builds on what we were just talking about there.
I mean, there's always, and I have just encouraged you all to engage with specific groups. So that is an important part of engagement. But there is something to be said about having some of those individual conversations, if that's the question. But is the question, folks, difficult to do a live discussion? But is it about encouraging people to be on their own in nature, or is it about engaging with individuals?
I think possibly, Lizzie, I know Lizzie well, work with Lizzie, and I think, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but it's about valuing that personal interaction between nature and oneself, whereas a lot of what we do, including this example, is in group activities when we're talking about engaging with the public. So so I guess that there's ways we can think about celebrating that individual connection with the natural world.
Yeah, and that's one of the many wonderful things about nature is that yes, definitely promote the individual benefits, but be mindful that certain groups of people, certain communities and individual people will not be comfortable on their own in nature. So, Black and brown people, for instance, are known to have said some of them don't feel welcome, hiking in the Beacon. So being on your own as a Black or brown person going up Pen y Fan might not feel safe. For others, it will feel safe. Being a queer person, you might not feel comfortable away from means of calling safety, for instance. Women alone in public space. So yes, there are benefits, but they're not equally accessible or desirable for all. And the converse is true. The benefits of being together as a community in nature.
Fantastic, that's great. So I'm going to see if we've got any other Q&As. Is there one more here? So this is one from Joe Simpson again. What you said about space is so interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. I think, folks, we're actually bang on time now for the group Q&A session. So I'd please invite people to post questions in that Q&A bubble on the left-hand side. Robin's come off back on camera as well, which is great. So this is just an opportunity for a range of questions to come to both speakers, please. So we've got sort of about 10 minutes or so, depending on how many questions come forward. So I know we've got some people in the background who are receiving questions, then posting them up. So please do add some into the Q&A bubble there so that we can start to sort of generate a bit of a discussion. While I'm waiting for that, I am going to pick up on something that Andrew said about expanding your partnerships. And I guess, is that something in terms of something that the Heritage Fund can particularly help with, or is it just, how best can people think about what the potential partners or collaborators could be, really? Any advice or guidance on that?
Yeah, well, of course, we only have 4 investment principles, and one of those is access, participation, and inclusion. And by the way, these 4 were not drafted in isolation by heritage boffins in a mahogany-lined room. They were a direct response to literally thousands of responses from stakeholders right across the UK. And those 4 principles came out really strongly, including access, participation, and inclusion. So we encourage all of our applicants to think how they might address that. We don't prescribe how you design your projects. We don't even prescribe what heritage is. It's whatever, anything from the past that you feel is worth preserving, protecting, recording for future generations. So expanding partnerships. Tell us how you want to do that. The more creative you want to be in your project design, the better. But it is a really important part of how we decide on our investments.
Fantastic. I've got somebody has sent me this, so I'm posting it on their behalf, but they're anonymous. So the question was, what's the best example of, queer representation you've seen in the sector thus far? That's a question for either of you, really.
There are so many. It's so diverse. I think the joy of it is that it goes beyond one identity but can represent all of it. So the best examples I've seen are where you have lots of people coming together to share stories and interact and to gain a sense of liberation. And I've been to a few events over the years which have managed that, and the sense of knowing that you're in a welcoming space and a community space where you bring together people with different backgrounds, you can feel it, and suddenly there is a lot more laughter, a lot more jokes, a lot of comfort with the people you're interacting with. And I think the way that this happens tends to be through a much more intersectional approach than just aiming to be LGBTQIA plus inclusive, but to really embrace the term of queering ecology, that you are going beyond just making it queer in the LGBTQ plus sense, but also breaking down issues around colonialism and kind of prescribed ways of being, that by kind of going outside of expected definitions and agreed labels that have kind of been assigned from on high, you let people come into their own spaces. Mm-hmm. And so, the best examples of representation I've seen have always come about where multiple people have been able to decide what they want to be in that space, and the space has just been made available to them.
Great. Andrew, do you want to come in on that one as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, I'd choose a very personal example. When we became parents, and prior to becoming parents, we joined a group that spent a lot of time, a group that I think has changed its name since then because it's so long ago, but it was called New Family Social, and they dealt with prospective queer parents and queer parents. So we were able to interact in nature all the time with people who had been through these processes before and their children, and then bring our child into it. So I think it was using nature as a hook for something else, and I think it wasn't about let's get queer people into nature, but they were getting queer people into nature. Yeah.
Fantastic. Somebody's put in the chat, coming out is mentally exhausting. The person you're telling only has to hear it once, but we have to do it over and over again. So on the back of that, I was thinking, how best do we explain to non-LGBTQ plus people that experience in a kind of professional setting?
Well, I used to work for an organisation whose sub-slogan was "Get over it." So, and I'm not suggesting we get over it. I'm suggesting that's how we respond. Gosh, I mean, it varies from day to day, doesn't it? You know, sometimes I cannot be bothered when I'm at the checkout to correct someone when they assume the gender of the person I'm buying chocolates for. It helps having a child sometimes who absolutely loves correcting people when they say, "Oh, is that for mummy?" And he loves saying, you know, "That's for my other dad." So I think the other phrase I used to use a lot was kind eyes. So if you want to bring people with you, if you want to change hearts and minds, you've got to believe people can change their mind and their behavior. So if we go on the attack every time someone gets something wrong, we're just going to box someone on the other side rather than create a bridge for them to join us. I'll stop there with that nugget of wisdom.
I think that's great. I would say that for me it does differ whether I'm in a personal space or a workspace. So I think a lot of the time in personal spaces I will think it's just not worth addressing it. Although I think with transness it can be quite visible, so it's just a case of letting it go a lot of the time. But also I have a lot of trusted friends who, especially in places where I'm meeting people socially for the first time, those friends will take on that emotional labor for me. And they know the extent to which I'm willing to be out in different circles and the ways to correct people. So I will have friends who are happy to go, "Oh, actually the pronouns are they, them," or whatever I'm using in that context. So having that kind of outsourcing is really important from a personal perspective. In a professional world, I think it's made a lot easier at the point where I really understood my own value in those situations. So I have become a lot more confident in my role since I worked out why I'm the expert in every room that I'm in. And that's not to say that I'm the expert in everything, but I work with academics where I am the expert in science communication and design principles, because we're not taught that very well in academia generally. And then on the other side of things, I'm often in spaces where I am the academic expert. And really just knowing my value and what I'm bringing to that conversation allows me to feel a lot more confident in self-advocating and saying, actually, this is the way that I deserve to be seen. So I think for me that's a huge part of managing to stand up for myself in those ways where it's required. But also understanding that because I have that value that I appreciate and my employers appreciate, if I need to remove myself from a situation, I know that I'll be back to do that. And then I think finally, the reason why I come out and I feel good about coming out in professional spaces is the point at which I realized I could be a role model for people. I find it much harder coming out on behalf of myself than being visibly trans and happy to come out and know that I am supporting someone else further down the line. And particularly in spaces where I interact a lot with students, people saying that, like, "Oh, I saw you do this," has been really wonderful.
Well, that's great to hear. And I know, Robin, you touched on when friends can be advocates or can absorb the emotional labor, but as colleagues, we can facilitate that environment. And actually, it can not just be helpful for those who are LGBTQ+, but actually anyone who is not kind of, you know, from the majority, whether it's heteronormative or otherwise, in creating those inclusive spaces, we can be advocates for that. I've got a question here. It's an anonymous one, but it says, for both of you, please, do you think having visible LGBTQ+IA role models and groups within organizations is important to help people feel included? So that's both role models and groups. So yeah. So, Robin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I just touched on this, the idea that being a role model, it feels really important. But being able to see other people being out and being queer and not following the set storyline of what it means to be in academia or in these kind of parts of the sector, I think just knowing there are other pathways, you don't have to be perfectly represented yourself, but the more diversity I see in a team, the more I know that I'm likely to be welcomed and included. So I was talking about this in another talk earlier today, actually, but the idea that when I was looking at whether I wanted to accept the job that I currently do, I didn't just look for, okay, how are trans people treated in this organization? I looked at the entire team that currently exists there. And like, okay, what is the diversity intersectionally? Like, what is this culture likely to be like if you've got these people working there? And so I think seeing role models, even if they don't necessarily share any particular traits with yourself, it can be anyone, but just seeing that diversity makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Robin. Andrew, do you want to come on that one?
I don't think I can add anything to that. Of course, visibility and visible role models is really important, but I would say that that visibility can be on all levels of the organization. So I act as the senior sponsor to our LGBTQ plus staff network, for instance. And we have some brilliant people doing some work there. We're having a discussion recently that just the existence of that network for some people is going to be good enough. They're never going to attend, because just seeing that the organization supports having a network is, okay, I'm fine. I don't need to go to a meeting. I don't need to go to social, but I know my employer is committed. So yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. No, thank you. And well done you for flying the flag for that group. That's great. Do you know, I'm just dipped into the chat. Vivian Ross Smith, who's one of the fantastic associate artists who works with Natia and Beth, has just put in the chat here, and Vivian has run fantastic engagement with queer people across South Wales, saying whether individual or group connection with nature, I think it's imperative to ensure that exploration and engagement isn't rushed. I think that also chimes with something maybe Lizzie was mentioning as well, different ways to engage. As queer people, we understand the need for safety in a very particular way. As Benjamin just saying, really resonating with Robin, said people choose how inclusive or exclusive a space is. Yeah. Love seeing projects that encourage nature as a point of return. It's a safe space for us to thrive in. Yeah, we need to ensure folk can access it as a point of return. That's great. Thank you, Vivian. And thank you for contributing to the programme as a whole as well. Right, we've got a few more questions actually. So I've got one a couple of minutes ago. Conservation is poor on people diversity, sort of per se, I think they're saying. But I feel like LGBTQ plus is an area where perhaps there's more representation than some. Do you think that's even true? And if so, what do you think underpins that, perhaps? Andrew first.
Yes, for that.
Sorry.
I mean, I don't know whether it's true or not, and I'm definitely not going to give you a definitive answer on that. I certainly meet other queer people in natural spaces as part of my job. That sounded really dodgy then, you know, and I am broadcasting from home. So, you know, I certainly meet people in the course of my work who are fellow queer travellers in the nature sector. I don't know why, if they are better represented, that might be. I think, you know, what I don't see enough of is black and brown faces in the natural heritage sector, and I know that's a consistent issue, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive either.
Yep, indeed. And Robin, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I would say similar. I think that there are definitely elements of queer representation within the environment sector, but it's maybe not the demographics that are the most left out. I do think within transness, especially, there are additional difficulties, and within gender, these access to different spaces becomes a little bit more dangerous. What I would say, I guess, is specifically talking within my little bit of the environment sector in academia, and entirely anecdotally, I do think there's a lot of representation in terms of people being present, but maybe not as much representation in terms of people being out. So I've been on field sites before where we've got months into a bit of research, and it's only then that we'll have had a conversation where someone will have said, oh, it's important to me that I come out at this stage. And on one site where we had more than, I think, a dozen people present, only one person was straight and cis. And nobody had been talking about it. Everyone had just left their identities at the door. And it turned out we were the vast majority. And so I think people do tend to gravitate to this sector For whatever reasons, for me, wildlife and nature has a very special place in my heart and how I connect to my own interaction with diversity. But it doesn't necessarily reflect that we are constantly out. We might be much more out when we are in the office or at our home institution, but the moment we step out into a public-facing element or out into nature or beyond our comfort zone and that home space, I think that's where we lose the visible representation.
Thank you. One thing I've observed is certainly we have a high representation of neurodiversity, certainly within this sector, and that's one of the reasons why that's going to be the theme for our final webinar. Just a little plug, folks, on the 18th of March. Right, we're getting close to the time we're going to have to stop with questions, but I think we've got one more. Right, this is from Ellen Williams. In terms of being more visible with identity, do you have any advice or thoughts on balancing this when you're working with partners or communities that exist on both ends of the political spectrum? Kind of touched on this earlier when I talked about operating in deep rural environments sometimes as well. Robin, do you want to start with this one?
It's a tough one. And for me, my personal rule is that if I don't feel safe in a space, I won't work there. And if I feel threatened within the way that I'm working, I will leave. And that is very much just part of actually my on-paper risk assessment. I know we mentioned personal risk assessments earlier, but this is part of what is logged with my employer, that if there is any hate speech, any aggression, I am within my rights to leave all equipment in place and exit that situation. And it is the loss of whatever community I've been engaging with, and I am under no obligation to stay and maintain that. So that's a very extreme example. I do work with as many different groups as I possibly can, but there does have to be that feeling of people coming to that conversation with respect and working through it collaboratively. So if it doesn't feel like there's collaboration, then I'm probably not going to get to the point where I'm making that in-person connection in the first place. So I think it's a very careful thing, particularly if you're an employer setting this up, who you put into which positions. And this is potentially a space where allies are going to do more good for quiet advocacy. And this doesn't necessarily mean that LGBTQ plus people can't be doing this at all. But I know of at least one example where there were people who, one person was a white queer person working on race issues and really trying to work around that. And the other person in the office that they talk all the time was a person of color working on queer LGBTQ plus issues. And it's the fact that you have this free exchange of information. The allyship is being done well and with reference to someone who can actually give lived experience, but the actual point-to-point contact of that engagement, if you know that it's going to be a huge amount of emotional labor on top of the mental labor of actually preparing the resources, if you can take that one step removed and rely on allies and community within your workspaces that are then going out to deliver this, I think it has a real potential to make it feel safer and to take some of that that friction away from what can be a really nice collaborative conversation.
Thank you, Robin. Andrew, do you want to say something on that one?
And, you know, a lifetime of editing in different situations, you know, and I say that, you know, despite my differences that I've spoken about, I also have white cisgender male privilege. You know, I think the principle of decide where your red lines are, and your employer should support you with that. You know, in terms of the corporate visibility, I think any organization should have a set of values, and they should be real. You know, you should be able to give examples of how the organization demonstrates them. Where are your red lines? Where's your employer's red line? And tap into that support. I know if someone from my team came to me and said, I feel uncomfortable dealing with this particular organization because of X, Y, Z, it may be, you know, for whatever part of their identity they felt uncomfortable, I would want them to know they could come to me, and I would do my absolute utmost to change that situation so they weren't put in that that kind of environment. No one for the sake of a paycheck should be put in an environment they don't feel safe in.
Absolutely. No, here. Thank you so much. Folks, that was our last question. And we've got one brief segment now, which is the poll. The reason why we do the poll now while we're engaged, it has just appeared. If you look on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the poll that's come up here. If you can please just rattle through those. There's a short series of questions. So I'm just going to give you an opportunity to just quickly give your initial response for each of those. And I'm going to ask Christy if she can put up the date for the next Diverse by Nature webinar as well. Christy, if you can share the slide just so we can remind people, that'd be great. So there we go. So folks, that's the 18th of March for the Celebrating Neurodiversity in the Environment and Conservation sector. So it's the same time. We'll have two speakers. I believe we will be joined by the fantastic storyteller that Andrew referenced earlier, who is saving the Snowdon rainbow beetle in Arari. That'll be Robbie, who actually works on the Natur program. So he'll be your chair, and be some fantastic insight from people with a lived experience of neurodiversity and working within the sector. And the poll's going to stay open, and you'll also have a chance to receive that afterwards as well if you didn't get a chance to complete it now. I just want to say a huge huge thank you to our speakers, and a huge thank you to our funders as well, not least the National Lottery Heritage Fund and all others on your screen there. Have a fantastic rest of your evening, and thank you for creating a safe space, an inclusive space. Please follow the programme on one of the many socials, and thank you so much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.